Amidst stark economic inequality in the recent years, the debate of whether socialism or capitalism is the superior economic system is no longer a taboo. However, people often enter into arguments with inconsistent jargons, which only serves to intimidate or straight up confuse the issue. Whichever side you're on in an argument, you never want your only line of defense to be your ego. In this two-part series, we'll dive into both systems. You will either change your mind or reaffirm your stance. Only this time, it'll be an informed judgment. There are essentially two mainstream economic systems, capitalism and socialism. We will focus on socialism in this episode. By definition, socialism is an economic and political system based on public or collective ownership of the means of production. Basically, the economy is centrally planned. The state decides on what is being produced and consumed in the economy. A close example would be the former Soviet Union. Now, some might say what they did wasn't true socialism. It's up for debate, but in this video, we'll consider failed socialism as socialism, just as we would in capitalism. Communism is often seen to be a more advanced form of socialism. In this system, there's no government or private property or currency. In other words, stateless, moneyless, classless. Private properties refer to tools of production, like land and machine, whereas personal properties, which are okay to own, are end products which can only be consumed, something like a toothbrush. Here comes the most famous brand of communism, Marxism. Karl Marx was a German philosopher who argued that capitalism breeds inequality between capitalists and workers, or what he called bourgeoisie and proletariat. Upon late stage of capitalism, where inequality is at its breaking point, there would be inevitable socialist revolutions. Capitalism would be overthrown. Socialism then takes over. The society would ultimately transition into full-fledged communism. He laid out the framework in his book in 1848, which inspired many leaders. But Marx died before he finished his work. With an incomplete instruction manual, socialist leaders either took reference from one another or executed through their own interpretations. Hence, different sub-brands and experimentations of Marxism, like Leninism or Maoism, Trotskyism, and a bunch of other isms came into being, and we all knew how that went. There's also Anarcho-communism, which rejects the transition phases of the Marxists and calls for immediate transformation into a communist society. An interesting place to look at would be a small community in Denmark, an anarchist state called Freetown, Christiania. Once you walk past that gate, you're de facto outside of EU. Branching out, there's Revisionist Marxism. They are ideologies that took root from Marxism, with one or more changes from fundamental Marxist premises. The most popular two being democratic socialism and social democracy. Democratic socialism is simply socialism through a democratic system. There's yet to be an example though. Whereas social democracy, or sometimes referred to as the Nordic model, has a strong welfare state, but with a relatively free market economy, like Norway, Finland, or Sweden. Social democracy is in essence capitalism, not socialism, due to its free market economy. These two often get mixed up with one another, even by advocates themselves.
Because some people say, are you a democratic socialist? I say yes, I do.
Yeah, except that he wasn't. Bertie's policies actually fall under social democracy, though he did claim the mislabeling was a strategic decision. In today's world, there rarely are pure forms of either system. Most countries have mixed economies. Also, remember not to identify a country's system by the name of its ruling party. Sometimes these names merely represent what they were working toward, or simply what they failed to become. Sophisticated socialists will probably disagree with this diagram in some way, since it didn't account for every single sub-branches, sizes of circles, positions, levels of authoritarian, and dozens of other axes that could have been introduced based on individual interpretations. So take this as a reference guide. Don't take any single person's word for it, especially mine. Do some further digging on your own and form your own judgment. If you learned something new in this video, click subscribe and the bell icon to get notified for similar weekly interesting content. For instance, did you know 7 out of 12 richest people on earth are Jewish? Click on last week's video to find out why in 6 minutes. If there are specific topics you want me to cover, comment below. See you next week.